Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of the GSMC College Football Podcast brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. We have a great show for you today. We are going to start talking about Miami and the ACC situation. Their AD had some very interesting comments about the Clemson and Florida State lawsuits that I want to jump into. Then we have an NFL draft update. McCarthy has gotten a lot of buzz, possibly going number 2 overall to the Commanders, so I want to break down all of that for y'all. And then we're going to get into some breakout players for 2024. This has become a very much recurring segment on this program, and we are up to part 4 on the defensive side of the ball. I think we're going to tap out about part 5 of either side of the ball, so nearing the end of this series, but definitely still have some more guys to get to. And then we have a top 10 Tuesday, and I think it's a really good one today. Definitely a very contentious one. I have the best position rooms in the country for you all today. Definitely a very, very hard list to put together, but I think I have a pretty good 10, but I'm sure there will be people that disagree with me. But let's start with this. I just want to remind you all before we get going here, the best way for you all to see your questions or comments on the screen is to use the tip and donation link at the bottom of the screen, gsmcpodcast.net. It's a huge help not only to us here at the network, but to you all. You get to see your question on the screen. You get to have a fun little back and forth here, possibly bring up something that we can kind of talk about. So definitely use gsmcpodcast.net if you have any of those questions. But let's jump right in. There has been so much happening around the ACC in particular. Those lawsuits are starting to pile up around the ACC headquarters, and there have been a lot of teams on the outside that we have been kind of watching. Obviously, Clemson and Florida State have jumped to the front lines. They have been the teams that we have already filed lawsuits against the ACC and have had counter lawsuits filed against them. So those are the two teams already involved, and everyone was kind of just waiting for who the next team might be. And Miami tended to be the team that everyone brought up, including myself. I thought they would be the next to jump on board, then possibly Virginia or North Carolina after them, but it looks like that might not happen. Their AD, Dan Radakovich, had a very interesting conversation on 560 AM down in Miami last week, where he was talking about just where they sit with the conference and his reaction to all of the new lawsuits and everything that has started to come out. So he essentially said they are very solid with the ACC. In fact, I have a quote here. He says, here at the University of here at the University of Miami, we are incredibly solid with the ACC. It's a great conference, provides a great structure and access to the college football playoff, which is very, very important. We are very proud to be a part of that and a leading brand within the ACC, and will continue to be a part of it. So, if you take that at face value, it looks like they are staying put, at least for the time being. And I think there's obviously a lot of question of when all this is going to start happening, because there's been talks for, I think, about 6 months now since Florida State has started this whole craziness around the ACC with filing the first lawsuit. There was some question of how quickly can all this happen, how quickly everything can, get down the road, and maybe Clemson and Florida State can leave the conference. And he went back to not the most recent, but one of the more recent conference realignment eras was Texas and OU going to the SEC, and they wanted out a little bit earlier than they were able to get out, so they had to wait a little bit and be able to afford the buyout to get out of that conference. So there's definitely some idea, and it seems like Dan Radakovich shares this, that it's going to take some time for Clemson and Florida State to pull this off, partly because that number is just so exorbitant. It's somewhere, I think the total would be somewhere around $700 million if they were to get out this year. So that doesn't make a lot of financial sense at the moment. So I think it's very possible that we see them wait a couple of years and kind of deal with the ACC for the time being, and work out for the next couple of years in the ACC, but then eventually come back to this and move on. But I think there's a lot of different things happening here, and I think a lot of people are wondering how much of a leg do these two teams in particular, and any teams that join after them, how much of a leg do they really have to stand on in terms of, do they really have an argument to leave? Do they really have something firm to stand on to make that argument. And I think the best way to do that is go into the TV deals, right? That's where a lot of this money comes from for these conferences, for these teams. That's where a lot of the, money is made in college football now. And the ACC is sitting somewhere around 17 million per team. They have 14 teams right now. I think that number will probably start to go up, which we'll talk about here in a second. But they have about 17 million. The SEC is closer to like 40 million, so almost or more than double what the ACC is making. Then you have the Big Ten around 31 million for their contract. So there's very obviously considerable gap between these two big powerhouses that we've talked about so much in the SEC and the Big Ten and everyone else, especially the ACC. So there's an argument to be made. There's no two ways about that. I think Clemson and Florida State are very obviously looking at this. They see what's going on in the sport of college football. They see that the ACC has almost kind of resigned themselves to a third-tier conference with those college football playoff distribution deal that came out. They pretty much said out in front of everyone that they are a third-tier conference and they are going to stay that way, at least for the time being. So that obviously is going to frustrate some people, especially when you have a media deal that has been set up so long ago and has not kept up with the times and is well behind where the Big Ten and the SEC are currently. So it's definitely a good argument by Clemson and Florida State, and I believe they're going to be successful in doing this. I think I talked about it really early on in this process once Florida State joined and once Clemson joined even more. This idea that in college football, it's all about, who has the most money, who has the most ability to make things happen. And when enough people are converged on a certain idea, those things tend to happen, especially when those people have a little bit of money at their disposal. So Florida State and Clemson, they're pretty much, at some point in the future, they will be out of the conference. The question now becomes who's going to join them and how long does that take? Because as Radakovich said earlier, there is very little chance that they can afford what they're going to have to afford if they want to leave ASAP. So it could be a Texas OU situation where you let a couple of years pass, you let that number come down a little bit, and then you strike when the time is right. So it'll all be very interesting to see how all of this is going to go down, because the ACC obviously is not hoping for anyone else to join this. I think they very, very much want this to be the only two teams that join these lawsuits. They very much want to keep everything intact. If you lose Clemson and Florida State, that's obviously a terrible loss, but you still have a great leg to stand on. You still have a ton of teams in that conference that hold weight in a number of different sports. So if it's just Clemson and Florida State, I think the ACC is okay. I tend to believe it's not going to be Clemson and Florida State, but Dan Radakovich has made it very clear that it's going to take a little bit of time, maybe a little bit more time than Florida State and Clemson fans would like, and that obviously puts off the idea of two major conferences, because that's where I think a lot of us feel like we're heading, where the ACC or the SEC and the Big Ten are sitting so far above everyone that they're essentially the NFC and the AFC of college football, right? So I think with Clemson and Florida State, that's obviously going to be the first domino to fall. And all of this craziness that is going to be happening over the next, year, 2 years, whatever it is, to get that number down to where Clemson and Florida State feel comfortable, and whoever else joins these lawsuits feel comfortable. But I think the ACC is in a position where they're essentially in damage control, as we've talked about a number of times on here, and they need to make sure that as many people don't join these lawsuits as possible, especially under the way that Florida State and Clemson did it, where Florida State was attacking from one angle, Clemson attacked from a totally different angle. So there's no real ability for the ACC to tie those two together, to use the same arguments for those two deals, and it makes it a lot tougher to deal with those. Obviously, you want to be able to group these as best you can and be able to create arguments that apply to as many different cases as possible. But Florida State and Clemson made that really tough on them by attacking from two different angles. And I think that's very likely what the next team will do. Whether that's Miami, it doesn't seem like it's going to be Miami for the time being, which is great news for the ACC because everyone was pointing to them to be the next one. But I think in the grand scheme of things, the ACC is very much locked in on one school. They're locked in on one team. They're locked in on one entity, and that is in Chapel Hill, North Carolina. I think we've talked about conference realignment so much over the last couple of years, and especially over the last little bit on this show, just talking about the ACC's future and kind of what's going to happen with it. And obviously, Clemson and Florida State are the biggest football programs in that conference. They hold the most weight in college football. They have the most history, national championships, all of that type of stuff. Miami right behind them in that respect. So there are tons of ability within those football programs. But when you talk about conference realignment, you got to talk about a lot more than football. You have to be able to expand that debate a little bit and think about the athletic department as a whole. And I'll be totally honest, there's not an ACC athletic department that comes really close to North Carolina in terms of being as complete and as well-rounded of a athletic department as there is in the country. I mean, they have so much ability. Obviously, the basketball program is the one that sets the pace. The football program, since Mac Brown has gotten there, has not necessarily reached the heights they wanted to, but still a 9 or 8 win team every single year, right in the mix for the ACC. So there's still some great stuff there. The Olympic sports are really remarkable there. Men's soccer is out of this world as well as women's. So there is tons to like about this North Carolina product. I think they are the team in all of this, frankly, whether you include Clemson or Florida State or anyone. I think they are the team that the SEC and the Big Ten want the most. I think they're the one that they're looking at and kind of licking their chops, really, really wanting them to join this fight because, as we've talked about a couple of different times, one of the biggest things in these court filings and one of the biggest things that will define a lot of this in the next probably couple of months is when we'll figure out all of this, is where these are going to be tried. Obviously, Florida State is trying to get theirs tried in Florida, while the ACC is trying to counter in North Carolina where their headquarters are. Same thing with Clemson. They want it in South Carolina. ACC wants it in North Carolina, and that holds a lot of weight. As we know, there are a ton of Florida State fans in Florida. There are a ton of Clemson fans in South Carolina. So if you're the ACC, you'd like to avoid that as much as possible. But if North Carolina jumps into the fray, all home court advantage in terms of having North Carolina as a home base is gone because North Carolina is a bigger deal in North Carolina than the ACC, let's be honest. So it would be very interesting if North Carolina was to jump in. I think they are the school that not only will make this a big-time story, but will really get the wheels churning in terms of getting this stuff moving forward because I know for a fact the SEC is looking at them as someone they would love to add. The Big Ten, they would fit incredibly well with the academics that they have over there. And then once North Carolina joins, I think there will be a lot more teams across the league that will be much more comfortable joining the fray because if North Carolina does something, then the ACC is going to listen, and the ACC is going to be under a really, really tough position going forward. So I think if North Carolina joins, then Miami, Dan Radakovich and Miami might change their tone a little bit and might join the party. I think Virginia is right behind them, and then a lot of stuff happens very quickly for the ACC. So I think while they might be safe from Miami for the time being, it looks like Dan Radakovich is plenty happy with what the ACC is doing right now and how they're handling all this. I think North Carolina is the one where if they jump in, the ACC's fate is becoming a little bit more real and a little bit coming a little bit quicker than I think they would have hoped. But at the end of the day, as of right now, they have 2 teams to deal with. I think they are trying to focus on those 2 teams as much as possible, but there are teams in the brush that are watching this very, very intently, and if Miami or especially North Carolina jump in, it could get very sketchy for the ACC very quickly. But we will definitely keep you updated with all the happenings there. I'm sure this month and the following month will be huge for this court cases, for figuring out what the future of the ACC really looks like in terms of who's leaving exactly, how many teams are leaving, who they need to backfill with, because a lot of that stuff needs to happen pretty quickly. So I think we'll get answers very quickly. We will keep you updated as those answers come in. But we're going to take our first break here, and when we come back, we're going to talk about the NFL draft, have a little update for you guys. Obviously, the big news is J.J. McCarthy possibly going number 2 overall to the Commanders. So we will break down what I think about that and all of the new news around the draft right after this.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on their face, yeah. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown, get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the noose it fits. I'm losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about Miami and their position in the ACC. They seem to be pretty happy right now, but as we know, things can change very quickly, so I will keep you updated with all of the things you need to know as that unfolds. But let's talk about the NFL draft. There has been so much going on around the draft process. Obviously, pro days have started to heat up across the country. There have been tons of guys that have been making their mark known throughout that process, and J.J. McCarthy has been the major topic of conversation, as he's been pretty much throughout this entire process, it feels like. Feels like we're always talking about J.J. and him slowly moving up these boards every time we get there, and now he's all the way up to number 2. It looks like BetMGM has changed their odds very recently. He went, I think, late last Tuesday, actually. He went up to plus 400. He was at plus 2,500, to be the second round pick on Monday, and then that flipped very, very quickly on Tuesday. And obviously, he did have his pro day last week. He did meet with the Commanders at that pro day, so maybe there's some news coming out of that where he very much impressed them in that interview, and they really fell in love with him. So it's very possible that the Commanders are now eyeing him as the number 2 guy. I think there are a lot of people that don't necessarily believe that notion, but at the end of the day, Vegas knows a lot more than a lot of us out there, so I tend to lean in their direction when I talk about this type of stuff. But I think the one thing to keep in mind here when you talk about Washington in particular is Cliff Kingsbury is their new OC. He worked with Caleb Williams when they were at USC, obviously, and was a huge help to him. And I think, obviously, they're probably not going to get Caleb Williams. He is going number 1 overall, almost definitely, unless anything goes crazy wrong for him from now until the end of the month. But I think when you look at this team and you look at the construction of this team, Dan Quinn, I think, is someone that would really love J.J. McCarthy. I think they are cut from the same cloth. I think they have the same view on football, and I think they would really get along. I think Dan Quinn is kind of the, not a mirror image, obviously, but very similar to the guy and the coach that Jim Harbaugh is, so I think that would be a good fit. I think Cliff Kingsbury would be not as great of a fit. I think having someone like Cliff Kingsbury, he's always been very attracted to the very athletic quarterbacks. Obviously drafted Kyler Murray number 1 overall when he was the head coach at the Cardinals. So I think someone like Jaden Daniels makes a little bit more sense for him. I think Dan Quinn might go the McCarthy route. So we might find out who has, obviously Dan Quinn will have more say in that conversation, but I feel like you got to ask the OC when you're drafting a quarterback, especially if that quarterback's going to start day 1 for you. So as for what I think about JJ going number 2 overall, I don't think this would be the best situation for him for a number of reasons. We just talked about Cliff Kingsbury. I just don't think it fits quite as well as Jaden Daniels would in that system. But also, they just added Marcus Mariota as a backup throughout the offseason, and offenses are you can morph offenses to different styles, obviously, and that's not necessarily overly tough, but you'd love to not have to, right? You'd love to be able to call your offense no matter what quarterback's on the field. And if they draft JJ and maybe things don't go as smoothly, or he suffers an injury or whatever, and Marcus Mariota has to come in, that offense needs to change fairly quickly and pretty drastically, because they are two very different quarterbacks. Now, Marcus Mariota and Jaden Daniels are a little bit more similar. They have some of the same traits. Obviously, the running ability is something that both of them have, so you would have the ability to kind of carry that offense through games no matter who's under center. And I think that's something that might be a little bit overlooked in the draft process. But at the end of the day, you do have to prepare for kind of the worst in some of these situations. And I think preparing for the idea of maybe one of these quarterbacks not hitting the way you want to, and having to have Marcus, do some spot starts here and there, and not having to change your entire offensive philosophy is a huge help to the team. So if I was in Washington's shoes, I would lean pretty heavily in Jaden Daniels' direction. I've been very clear. I think he's just remarkable and does so many incredible things on the football field, but there are some knocks on him. He has some injury history. He is a little bit, let's say, a backyard football type of guy where he's going to take off and just kind of he gets himself into a little bit of trouble at points and gets some pretty aggressive hits at points. So I do understand that there are definitely people in that organization that lean JJ. I would not be surprised if there was a lot of them. But if I was in their shoes, I would be leading Jaden Daniels. But as of right now, there is a lot of smoke towards JJ and the Commanders. So we will keep you updated with all of that stuff there. Another thing that's been happening throughout this process is the wide receiver one has gotten a little bit more murky than we all thought it would. Malik Neighbors had a just remarkable pro day, ran a 4.35 in the 40-yard dash, did a number of just remarkable things, showed off his athleticism, and it's become a big conversation of, do you like Marvin Harrison Jr. more or do you like him more? And I think I've been very clear. Marvin Harrison Jr. to me is one of the best built wide receivers that I've ever seen. He's one of the most complete wide receivers I've ever seen. And while I love Malik Neighbors and I think he's just remarkable, I don't know if anyone in this class quite touches what Marvin Harrison Jr. can be at the next level. But I do think Marvin Harrison Jr. not working out at his combine or his pro day really did hurt him, because it opens this door for anyone to kind of jump into that spot. And there are really talented wide receivers in this group. I mean, Malik Neighbors is just kind of the tip of the iceberg when we talk about this wide receiver group. Roma Dunze is the one right below them, but it looks like people are kind of battling over Neighbors or Marvin Harrison Jr., and the Cardinals are the team that seems to be the one that everyone has to watch. I think the Cardinals, everyone's pegging them as the one that takes the wide receiver at 4 and kind of replaces that DeAndre Hopkins void and keeps it moving. And I don't know who they have number 1 at the wide receiver position. It's very likely they could have Malik Neighbors there. It's very likely they could have Marvin Harrison Jr. there. There's so many different ways that you could rank these guys. You could even have Roma Dunze number 1 in this group, and I wouldn't call you crazy. So the Cardinals are the team that really matters here. Do they have Neighbors 1 or MHJ 1? We'll find out, I suppose, on draft day, because I think this is one that we won't get too many more answers to. Obviously, these guys will go through interviews and stuff like that, so we'll get some type of idea. But I think that draft night, that number 4 pick might be the most intriguing out of the top 3, especially if JJ does not go number 2 and it stays chalk the way that we kind of expect it to go with Caleb Williams, Jaden Daniels, and then Drake May, number 3. But let's talk about Drake May, because as J.J. McCarthy has been building up all of this energy and all of this talk around him, I suppose, is the best way to put it. He's become kind of the belle of the ball when you talk about the NFL draft. Drake May has kind of fallen by the wayside a little bit. People were absolutely in love with this kid when this process started. He was the number 2 quarterback for a lot of people early in last season and kind of throughout last season, but then Jaden Daniels put up just ridiculous numbers a year ago and showed off his remarkable ability, jumped him to go to number 2, and now it looks like JJ McCarthy might be jumping him to go to number 3 and knocking Drake May down to QB4. And I got to be honest, I think this might be the best thing for him, weirdly enough. I think the top 3 teams have varying situations that are going to be available for all of these players. Obviously, the Bears, I broke it down a little bit last week. I think that is a very good situation. I think Caleb Williams likely is walking into a situation that is about as good as he could have asked for, especially where the Bears were even 2 years ago from a roster standpoint. It's remarkable the turnaround that they've had. Then you get into the Commanders, which is a little bit more sketchy, but still have a foundation there that I think you can be successful in. I think Cliff Kingsbury is a good OC. I don't think he's a great head coach, but I think the OC is where he kind of shines, so I think that helps. But the team that I'm watching the most throughout this quarterback sweepstakes, if you will, is the Minnesota Vikings. I think they are the team that all of these quarterbacks hypothetically should want to go to. Obviously, only one will go to them, and it'll likely be the last one off the list. And right now, it looks like that might be Drake May. I've seen a ton of mock drafts that have had them trading up into the 5 position with the LA Chargers, who obviously do not need a quarterback, and possibly grabbing them one of these top guys. And May has been one that I've seen pretty recently, and obviously, this is a great situation for Drake May. I think Kevin O'Connell is obviously one of the best offensive minds in the entire game of football. I think he's great at putting guys in the right spot, but also I think having Drake May's arm talent and arm strength in particular will let him open up this offense a little bit more than he was able to with Kirk Cousins. So I think that helps a lot. And then you look at the receiving core, and it's just ridiculous. Justin Jefferson is the best wide receiver in the country, in my opinion. Jordan Addison is developing into one of the best number 2s in the entire league. And then you look at TJ Hawkinson, who's a remarkable tight end. It's insane, the ability and the amount of toys he would have to play with up in Minnesota. And then obviously you talk about Christian Darrisaw as your left tackle. Doesn't get much better than that. So although Drake May has technically fallen a little bit in draft boards, I think it might be the better thing for him in the long run if he were to be drafted by the Vikings. Obviously, a lot of differing opinions out there of how these quarterbacks are going to go, but if Drake May finds his way to Minnesota, I think he and the Vikings will be very happy about that. I'll put it that way. Another thing that I've noticed throughout this draft process is Brock Bowers just continues to slowly slip down the boards, and I kind of understand where people are coming from, but I also think they're making a massive mistake. So I think people are getting a little bit gun-shy around tight ends early in the draft. Obviously, Kyle Pitts was taken number 4 overall by the Atlanta Falcons, and things have not quite worked out there. He did have some injury trouble, did have 1,000 yards in his rookie year, so I think there's still ability there, but at the end of the day, that is not necessarily looked back on as the greatest pick in the world. So I think Brock Bowers has made some teams a little bit nervous. He is a little bit undersized for the tight end position. People worry that he's not the greatest blocker, although for his size, he's a very, very solid blocker. I think Brock Bowers, in my personal opinion, is not necessarily just a tight end. I think he is someone that is just a football player. He's a receiver at the end of the day. He is someone that you can line up all over the place. You can do jet sweeps with him, which is something that shouldn't be possible for a tight end, but you can do it. And as long as he is put in a situation where he is allowed to be a difference maker, he's allowed to do all of the remarkable things that he's capable of, I think he's going to be an absolute game changer. And not only a game changer in the sense of adding a tight end to attack the middle of the field and attack the seams and do that type of thing, but a difference maker that could take you from a fringe playoff contender to a team that could make the Super Bowl and be a big part of any season, especially the 2024 one, because this kid is just different. That's the best way to describe it. I've watched him a number of times throughout his years at UGA. I was here when he was here, and man, there are some things this kid can do on a football field that are just out of this world. But then finally, one thing I've noticed is, and we talked about it a little bit when talking about Drake May, is there are going to be tons of trades on draft night, especially in that first round. It feels like there are so many teams to watch. The Bears have the 9th pick, and there's been some talk about them trading down and getting more picks for that. Minnesota trading up to 5. We've talked about Atlanta possibly trading down. There's been so much movement in the draft board as I've seen these different mock drafts. So I think that's something to watch. You won't exactly know where your team sits until they make the pick, pretty much. So it'll be really interesting to see how that night goes. I'm very excited for the draft. Obviously, we are in draft month officially, and it's fast approaching. So I will keep you updated with all of the information that comes in throughout this time. I think it's going to be a very interesting draft. I've said before, this is one of the more talented drafts that I've seen, and I think there will be a lot of teams that would be very happy, but there are definitely some missteps that could happen. But I will keep you updated with everything happening throughout this next month and leading up to the draft, possibly even break down how I think the top 10 will go at some point here pretty soon. But we're going to take our second break here, and when we come back, we're going to talk about breakout players for 2024. This has become kind of a recurring segment on here. We are to part 4 of the defensive side of the ball, so nearing the end for sure, but I had some in my back pocket that I could pull out. So definitely stick with us, and we will be right back with that.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube, absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube to catch one of your new favorite shows, like the GSMC College Football Podcast, Chip Shot Football Podcast, Hoops and Heels Women's Sports Podcast, GSMC Basketball Podcast, and so many more. Check it out for yourself. GSMC Sports Network, now available on YouTube absolutely free. Search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube right now.
Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about the NFL draft, giving you guys a little bit of an update as pro days kind of heat up across the country. But now it's time for breakout players of 2024. We have so many guys to break down today. The defensive side of the ball has been a little bit tougher to put together, but yesterday the gears were flowing. I had tons of guys that I could pull from, and let's start in Tuscaloosa, Alabama, and let's start with Keon Keeley, the edge rusher that is going into his sophomore year. A very, very talented guy out of high school, a 5-star that was the number 3 guy in the country, regardless of position. So the talent is very, very clear. He was obviously stuck behind Dallas Turner and Chris Braswell a year ago, so that made it a little bit tough to get on the field, as it would for literally anyone coming into any program pretty much. But he's someone that they're going to absolutely need to step up at the edge rushing position. Kind of plays a hybrid linebacker edge rushing position, and the athleticism is just off the charts. He has every ability to be the next elite pass rusher that Alabama has had. They keep churning out these guys. Feels like it's just their business to do it. And Keon Keeley is someone that I think has as high of a ceiling as most of the guys they've brought in the past little bit, including someone like Dallas Turner, who might just be the number 1 defensive player off the board when it comes to the end of this month. So Keon Keeley has every ability to be an elite pass rusher, and if he is, Bama's ceiling jumps very, very quickly. Obviously, Bama is right in the conversation for the SEC and for getting into the playoff. I think there are some people that think they can't win a title. I tend to believe they can, but especially if Keon Keeley is rolling early on, they definitely can. He is someone that can be an absolute game wrecker for them, and as we all know, if you can get to the quarterback, you're going to make game-changing plays, and that's kind of the ultimate game changer in college football. If you have an elite pass rush, it's going to get dangerous for some offenses out there. But let's move on up to Madison, Wisconsin, and talk about Tackett Curtis. He's someone that came into USC actually a year ago and portaled over to Wisconsin as USC kind of purged a lot of that defensive side of the ball. But I think, unlike some of the players that left, I think this is one that really hurt Lincoln Riley. I think he was hoping that this kid would be a part of the culture shift that is going on around there, but he found that was not the best place for him. Obviously, getting rid of Alex Grinch, a guy that definitely was a big part of recruiting him, definitely played a part. So he has found his way to Wisconsin. He is now a Badger, and I just love this kid's game. He plays as tough and instinctive football as you need to play if you're going to be an elite linebacker at this level. You need to have a little bit of crazy about you, and Tackett Curtis absolutely has that. He definitely made some freshman mistakes last year, but he has all the traits to be an elite linebacker, and I think a change of scenery could be good for him. I think he's in a little bit more of a comfortable spot now, and I think he's someone that will be super important for Wisconsin, not only this year, but going through the kind of Luke Fickell era as they start this off. Obviously going into his second year this year, not necessarily a ton of big-time expectations on Wisconsin, although I think they're a very interesting team. But if Tackett Curtis can become the linebacker that I think a lot of people expect him to be, things get very interesting very, very quickly up in Madison. So definitely a guy to watch, definitely a guy that we might not be talking about right now, but we definitely can be talking about as a Big Ten, all Big Ten player, or even an All-American at the end of the year, to be totally honest. But then another linebacker down in Oxford, Mississippi, Suntarine Perkins, is someone that is just as athletic as anyone in the country. I don't know if there's anyone as athletic as Suntarine Perkins in the country, to be totally honest. Even as a freshman, it was totally clear that he was just a little bit different. Every time he stepped on the field, I've talked about this phenomenon when we watched Justice Haynes, the running back over at Alabama. These guys just look a little bit different. They're built a little bit different, and Suntarine Perkins isn't the same. He is absolutely ridiculous. He is someone that every team would love to have on their roster, but a year ago, 3.5 sacks, 18 tackles, so not necessarily lighting up the stat board, but as a freshman, it's obviously going to be tough to get on the field, and he's someone that is as plenty athletic enough to drop back into coverage and play kind of that sideline-to-sideline role that some linebackers do play. So he's not necessarily a pure pass rusher, but he definitely can when he needs to. So obviously, a lot of the talk has been around Walter Nolan coming in from Texas A&M and Princely Umanmielen coming in from Florida, but Suntarine Perkins might be the biggest difference maker on this entire team. If you can get a pass rush, as we just talked about, things change very quickly, and Ole Miss is absolutely going to need that defensive line to step up big, and I think Suntarine Perkins could be the guy that we notice the most on Saturdays, to be totally honest. Another guy on the defensive line, a little bit more of an interior guy, but still has pass rushing ability, is Samuel Okunlola. He has made his way from Pitt to Colorado, had 5 sacks in 11 games last year. He is super important to this Colorado team. Colorado, we know about the defensive talent on the back end. When you talk about Cormani McClain, you talk about Travis Hunter, that's about as good of a duo at corner as you could possibly ask for, especially with those guys going into their sophomore and junior season, respectively. So I think they feel great about their back end. Shiloh Sanders is back and is a very, very experienced, smart football player. So I think they feel good about the back end. I don't think they feel too great about the front seven. I think that's something that definitely needs a lot of help, and Samuel Okunlola is as important of a player as they could possibly have this year. They need someone in the middle to kind of set the energy, set the pace for this season, and show people that Colorado can stand up to a good run game, can stand up against some of the physicality that they're going to encounter, because there are some teams in the Big 12, I forgot where they were moving there for a second. There are some teams in the Big 12 that are going to play very physical football. Texas Tech is one of them. Kansas State plays very physical football. Utah, they know about that, but play very physical football. There are so many teams that they're going to go up against that are going to have big-time offensive linemen and are going to try to push you off the spot. And if you can have a guy in the middle like Samuel Okunlola, that can push them right back, I think it's a huge benefit to this Colorado team, and not only increases their chances to make a run in the Big 12, but gives them a half-decent shot to be a total game wrecker this upcoming year and possibly make the playoff like Dion has promised for some reason. But let's get into another guy on the back end of these defenses, and Amari Harvey, a corner from Georgia Tech. He is someone a little bit more off the radar for some people, but he massively improved throughout last season. I think if you watched him week 1 and you watched him in the bowl game against UCF, you would think they were two totally different players. He was just a remarkable talent throughout last season, and he had a great day against UCF in the bowl game, had a pick, had 3 pass breakups, was essentially just all over the field. And Georgia Tech is one of those teams that I've talked about a little bit, being kind of a under-the-radar, dark horse candidate in the ACC, and having a lockdown corner would help that a ton. They're going to face some teams with some really good pass games. Obviously, Georgia is on the schedule there, so that is not going to make it super easy. But if you have that corner that you can go to and feel very comfortable in, no matter where he is on the field, no matter who he's guarding, it helps a whole lot. And I think Amari Harvey is someone that absolutely could be that for the Yellow Jackets. It's going to be definitely a lot of patchwork on that defensive side of the ball. It was not very good a year ago overall, and Brent Key has done a lot of good work in the portal to get a number of guys in, but I think Amari Harvey is someone he's really, really glad to have back on campus. I think he's someone that not only could mix up Georgia Tech's year, but possibly the entire ACC, depending on how well he plays, because I think Georgia Tech is only a couple of difference makers on defense away from being right in that conversation for the ACC. So I would definitely keep my eye on Amari Harvey. And then finally, one more corner to finish it out here, and we're going to talk about Javian Toviano, the cornerback from LSU. We know that the LSU pass defense was just downright bad last season. There is no secret about that, but Toviano was one of those guys that was semi-bright spot. Obviously had some struggles. He was a freshman last year, but he had some moments where it's very obvious why he was such a highly touted recruit that was getting recruited by literally everyone. LSU, Texas A&M were the main ones, but everyone was in on this kid, and it makes total sense. His ball skills are just remarkable. Only going into his sophomore year, getting more confidence and reps under his belt is going to be super helpful to him, because they're going to go up against some real good wide receivers, and they do have guys like Sage Ryan, they do have guys like Zy Alexander on that back end that are really, really talented, but I think Toviano might be the most talented of the group. I think he can be the biggest difference maker for this team and possibly take their back end from, what it was last year, which was downright awful, to pretty good to not, maybe even elite, depending on how well he plays. I think having Corey Raymond back in the building around there is a huge addition for him, especially getting his development on a quicker path is the most important thing for LSU right now, because that back end, they are returning a lot of guys, but when you return a lot of guys from a bad pass defense, it's kind of a double-edged sword, isn't it? So I think Javian Toviano is someone that is still very young, still has tons of area to grow, and having Corey Raymond in his corner is going to be remarkably helpful for this young man. So very excited to see what he can do. He is someone that I've been watching ever since he's been recruited, partly because he was recruited by Texas very heavily, but when he went to LSU, you knew he was going to be a difference maker and kind of add to that DBU lore that LSU fans have. So I think Toviano is maybe not the most experienced, maybe not the guy that doesn't have the most reps under his belt, but I tend to believe he's the most talented guy in the back end of this defense for LSU, and if they're going to be, even halfway decent in a pass defense this upcoming year, he's going to be someone that is going to be super important for that. But we're going to take our final break here, and when we come back, we're going to have another Top 10 Tuesday for you. We're going to talk about the best position groups in the country, and this one is really tough. I'll be totally honest with you. I had a very tough time putting this together. There are a ton to go into this, and ranking them is wildly tough when you're going different positions and that type of thing. But I think I have a pretty good 10. I'm sure there will be some people that don't agree with me at all, but at the end of the day, I think I have a pretty solid 10, and we will break it down right after this.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about some breakout candidates on the defensive side of the ball for 2024. Tons of guys that we had to break down in this segment. Sort of reaching my wit's end with this segment, but I think I have at least one more in me. So probably part 5 for offense and defense coming soon, and then we'll find something new to go after. But for now, let's talk about another Top 10 Tuesday, and this one, in my opinion, is the toughest to put together that I have had to do so far, because position groups are incredibly tough to put together, partly because there's tons of depths in these rooms that you don't see, and you don't really know how strong the room is until these guys get on the field, but also comparing the offensive line room to a linebacker room is really tough to do, but I did my best. I think I put together a really solid list here, and it starts off with the LSU Tigers offensive line, and I think this is a group that is just about as good as you could possibly imagine if you're an LSU fan, to be totally honest. Let's start with Will Campbell. He, in my opinion, is the best offensive lineman, the best offensive tackle in the country, and is one of the few non-quarterbacks that I think could go number 1 overall in the NFL draft this upcoming year. He's an absolute game changer. Every time he's on the field, you can tell that no one's getting past him. Pretty much no one beats him one-on-one especially, so I'll be very interested to see what Will Campbell can do. I think he is an absolute game changer for LSU and gives Garrett Nussmeier a very, very comfortable blindside on most of these plays. And then you follow that up with someone like Emory Jones on the right tackle position, Garrett Dellinger, Miles Frazier, and then a young talented kid in DJ Chester at center, obviously replacing Charles Turner III, who has been a mainstay in that offensive line for quite some time. But DJ Chester's a very talented kid. I think this is a group that across the board is just remarkable, and I think they will be able to give Garrett Nussmeier a little bit more peace of mind when he's standing back there in the pocket, that he's safe for an extra couple of seconds with these 5 in front of him. But number 2, I have the Texas wide receiver room. Obviously, this was a room that lost a ton of talent with Adonai Mitchell, Jordan Whittington, and Xavier Worthy walking out the door, but Sark wasted no time in replacing those guys. He got Isaiah Bond from Alabama, who was the reception leader for them a year ago. Silas Bolden from Oregon State, who can just fly. Matthew Golden is a very, very experienced receiver from Houston. And then Jonte Cook is someone that is ready to step into the spotlight, possibly at that Xavier Worthy type position for Texas. And that doesn't even scratch the surface for the number of guys that can actually make big-time plays for them. DeAndre Moore and Ryan Wingo are making huge strides, it looks like, in spring. They are people that I would not be surprised if they made big-time plays. Ryan Niblett, another guy that is just so fast and will be really, really tough to keep off the field, whether that's in kick return or punt return, I don't know. But he's definitely someone that could make plays. So this group is a very talented front four. There's no doubt about that. I think we will see as many wide receivers on the field as possible for Sark in Texas this upcoming year, because it's going to be really hard to keep all of these guys off the field. At number 3 position, I do have Bama's linebacking room, and it's really because of the two up front. Deontay Lawson and Jahad Campbell are about as good of a duo as you could possibly ask for. They are athletic, they are smart, they are experienced, they are the heartbeat of this team in a lot of ways, and the energy that they bring is just unmatched. I think having those two up front gives this Bama defense the highest floor that they possibly could have with all of the departures that they ended up having. But young guys like Keon Keeley, as we talked about, Kwa Rousseau, and are definitely ones that need to step up. More edge rushing type guys, but definitely can play that linebacker position as well. So tons of really talented guys in this group. Obviously it is Alabama, but I think those front two just set them totally apart and give them an ability on defense that not a lot of people are going to have with two guys that are just as good as they come pretty much at the linebacker position. And then at the number 4 spot, I do have the Ohio State running back room. We're talking about elite duos. Travion Henderson and Quinshon Judkins is about as elite as it gets. I think the best running back duo in the entire country. And I think the margin's pretty comfortable. I think they will definitely shrink throughout the year. There are so many guys that are kind of stepping into bigger roles. Branson Robinson down in UGA is one. Jaden Blue at Texas, another. So I think that gap will start to kind of shrink a little bit, but these two are absolute game changers. I think Travion Henderson, in my personal opinion, is the best running back in the entire country coming back this year. I think he's an absolute game changer that will be possibly a Doak Walker Award winner, but the thing that makes me most excited for this room and these two guys in particular is Chip Kelly coming in the door. I think his offensive ability using running backs in particular is just remarkable. It's really second to none, so I cannot wait to see what he does with these guys because you don't really have to do too much, but when you can get creative, their ability becomes that much more special. So very excited to see what comes of those two and everyone else in that room. Still some very talented guys right behind them, but it's going to be tough for them to get some touches for sure in this upcoming year. But at the number 5 position, I do have the Georgia linebacker room. I think the Georgia and Bama one is splitting hairs, honestly, in a lot of ways. I do like the top line, Bama, just a little bit better. They do have CJ Allen and Smile Munden over at UGA, and then the depth is just out of this world. You have guys like Jalen Walker, Raylan Wilson, Justin Williams coming in as a freshman. The depth on this Georgia linebacker room might be a little bit better than Bama. I just tend to lean the top two guys at Bama just a little bit more. But the Georgia linebacker room has literally everything you could possibly want. They just come in different packages. If you want experience, Smile Munden and Jalen Walker and CJ Allen to a certain degree can give you that. If you want young talented players, Justin Williams, Raylan Wilson, and somewhat of CJ Allen, he's just all over the place, honestly. He's just remarkable. So I think this group is as deep of a group as you will find in the country, and Georgia's going to need it. They love their linebacker sets. They love putting multiple guys out there and playing different roles. So they're going to have plenty of people to play around with, and it'll be very interesting to see how Kirby and his defensive staff kind of employs that throughout the season. But the number 6 position, getting into the back end of the list here, is the Michigan Wolverines and their defensive line. They lost a number of defensive players this in the draft and through the portal this past offseason, but the D-line didn't get quite hit the way that everything else did. Chris Jenkins leaving is a huge loss for them, no doubt about it, but when you have someone like Mason Graham to replace him, things feel a little bit better if you're a Michigan fan. And then Kenneth Grant right next to him. I think they're both going to be absolute beasts on the inside. You have Josiah Stewart on the edge is another guy that I think is going to break out for the Wolverines. So while this group definitely did lose a big-time player in Chris Jenkins, they replaced him with two guys that I think have the ability to be just as talented. Mason Graham has already kind of made his mark. Kenneth Grant kind of stepping into that role a little bit, but very excited about this group. I think this is one of those, Michigan's always going to have a mean defensive line. That's kind of just going to be a mainstay, at least for the next little bit up in Ann Arbor. And then number 7 is the only quarterback room we have on this list, and it's Oregon's. It's just ridiculous what they were able to do in the transfer portal, and Will Stein was the main person that benefited the most, the OC over there at Oregon. Adding Dylan Gabriel to this staff is good enough, right? Having someone that is that experienced, that is that accurate, can only do great things. And then you just add Dante Moore for good measure, and I think it comfortably makes them the most talented, the most experienced quarterback room. Having two guys that started games for Power 5 schools now on your roster is just insane. I think Oregon is really the only team in the country, as I see it, that can kind of take a quarterback injury in stride. I don't necessarily think there will definitely be some type of drop-off between Dylan Gabriel and Dante Moore, but both those guys are remarkably talented. Both those guys have started, and obviously having the in-helmet communication, like we've talked about in the past, is only going to help these kids. So I think Oregon, if Dylan Gabriel goes down for some odd reason. Hopefully he doesn't, but if he does, Dante Moore is going to be right there and he's going to be ready to roll. So it'll be really interesting to see all of that develop, and maybe I'm wrong. Maybe Dylan Gabriel's the one sitting on the bench and Dante Moore's the one calling the shot. So just a remarkably talented duo there, and kind of an embarrassment of riches for Will Stein for sure. And then number 8 position, I do have the Alabama running back room. This one's just a three-headed monster that no one wants to deal with. I can promise you that. Justice Haynes is someone that I think everyone around college football is going to be talking about after this year, possibly coming. He's going to be coming back most likely for the following season, and there will be people that will be talking themselves into putting a Heisman future down on him because he is an absolute game changer. I think he could absolutely win the Doak Walker Award this upcoming year with the way that I think Alabama is going to be able to run the ball. But he has some great guys right behind him. Jamarian Miller is an awesome back that has a ton of experience. Richard Young was a 5-star coming out of high school and is definitely ready to take a step forward if needed. So I think they have a three-headed monster, but I think Justice Haynes is the one that's the scariest and the one that a lot of defense will definitely cower a little bit against. And then 9, I did cheat a little bit here. I added the entire defensive backs for Ohio State, but I couldn't pick between the two. The remarkable talent on the back end of this defense is just insane. Obviously, adding Caleb Downs elevates any group, but Ohio State was already pretty good at that position, and then they added Caleb Downs. Denzel Burke on the outside is in a contract year for the NFL, will definitely be trying to play his best football. Noah Igbinosun, another corner that I think is really talented. Lathan Ransom, great in the safety position. And then you add guys like Jordan Hancock and Lorenzo Styles. It might be a literal no-fly zone. I'm not sure if anyone is going to be able to complete passes with any type of consistency against them. So love that group. I think it's as deep as it gets in the country, and I think the talent is just off the charts. And then finally, to round out the list, I have the Texas offensive line. 2 offensive lines kind of bookending this list, and it's really because of those left tackles. We talked about Will Campbell. I think Kelvin Banks is the only offensive tackle that comes close to Will Campbell in terms of ability and talent. I think he will be a top 10, top 15 pick probably in this upcoming, or in the 2025 draft. I think he's someone that is an absolute game changer for Texas. He came in as a freshman, made some freshman mistakes, but was still very talented. His sophomore year was essentially lights out for most of the year, and in going into his junior year, Texas fans expect him to be as big of a player as possible for them and be one of the best offensive linemen in the entire country, which I expect him to be. And then you add guys like Jake Majors, who is remarkably experienced. Hayden Connor is doing incredible job at the right guard position. DJ Campbell, another guy that's doing a great job. Neto Umeozulu, is emerging star. Cam Williams, who's taking over for Christian Jones at the right tackle, is another one that's kind of popping off early on in spring ball. So tons of talent in that room. Across all 5 guys, you have to feel very confident if you're a Longhorn fan that at the very least Quinn Ewers will have some time to process the field and get rid of the ball. And then we have some honorable mentions, some people that barely missed the list and definitely could have if you have a different ranking for these, because there are so many different ways you could go about this. Let's start with the Georgia tight end and running backs room. Georgia tight ends are going to be off the charts. Todd Hartley has made that very, very clear throughout the years. And then the running back room, all the same. I think Branson Robinson, Trevor Etienne, I think Roderick Robertson is apparently becoming incredibly hard to tackle in camp right now. So I think that room is just ridiculous. The Miami O-line room is becoming more and more talented. Francis Mauanoa, I think, is ready to take that next step and be a big-time player for them and maybe one of the best linemen in the entire country. The Clemson linebacker room is going to be good pretty much every single year. You have Barrett Carter, you have Kobe McLeod, you have Sammy Brown coming in as a freshman. Tons of talent there. The Ohio State wide receiver room, as always, is going to be on this list. Just a remarkable group. Jeremiah Smith coming in is just insane embarrassment of riches, but you also have Carnell Tate, Brandon Ennis, and Emeka Egbuka out there. So just crazy talent. They honestly could have made the top 10 for sure. And then you have the Ole Miss D-line room, tons of transfer talent coming in. We talked about Sunshine Perkins, who kind of plays an edge linebacker role, so he can kind of be grouped in with this as well. And then the Penn State running back room, Katron Allen and Nicholas Singleton, is about as good as it gets when you have a duo, a running back duo. So tons of talent across the country. I'm sure there are groups that I missed, but at the end of the day, this was a very, very hard top 10 to put together, but I think I did a pretty solid job. I think this is a group that makes some sense. I think there is definitely some leeway in here and definitely some people that will have different rankings, but at the end of the day, putting that together was not too easy, I'll be totally honest with you. But that will do it for this edition of the GSMC College Football Podcast presented by the GSMC Sports Network. Your support means a lot to us, so please remember to subscribe, leave a positive review. It does make a huge difference for us. Also, follow us on Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, Instagram, all of the social pages for anything you need in terms of updates and all the content that we put out. We have tons of people doing incredible work across pretty much every sport you could possibly think of. So any sport update you need, we are here for you. But thank you again so much for listening, and I will see you guys tomorrow.
Mm-hmm.